My name is Sheila, and if there's one thing you should know about me right off the bat, it's that I grew up surrounded by books. More than just stacks of them at home, my dad managed a big publishing house, and ever since I was a little girl, I'd tag along with him to work whenever I got the chance. Got your nose stuck in a book again? Dad would joke every time he found me curled up in some corner of his office, deep into whatever I could get my hands on. Yeah, and I bet I can read more books than you this month. I'd shoot back, always ready for a challenge. Those days at his office, I wasn't just reading, I was living in worlds crafted by imagination. It was magical, really. When I wasn't reading, I was watching Dad in meetings, seeing how he dealt with writers, illustrators, and all the big shots who thought they knew better. He handled it all with a kind of cool that made everyone respect him, but never made him unapproachable. I took the love for books straight into adulthood, became a teacher, shaping young minds to hopefully find the same joy in reading that I did. And every last Friday of the month, I kept up the ritual of visiting Dad at work. It was one of those Fridays when life decided to throw me a curveball. Dad introduced me to Ben, a lanky guy with an awkward smile and an armful of manuscripts. He was there to pitch his latest book, hoping Dad would bite. Ben, this is my daughter, Sheila. Sheila, Ben's a budding writer, got some interesting ideas, Dad said, clapping him on the back. Ben extended a shaky hand, which I took, smiling. Nice to meet you, Sheila. Your dad tells me you're the real critic around here. Hope you won't be too harsh on me. I laughed. I'll try to go easy on you. What's your book about? We hit it off from there. Turned out, Ben was funny, a bit rough around the edges, but he had an honest charm about him. His stories weren't bad either, just a little unpolished. Dad saw potential in him, and after a year of him courting me with quaint coffee shop dates and midnight walks, talking about everything from Play-Doh to the best pie in town, we decided to get married. The wedding was a simple affair, just close family and friends. Dad was beaming all day, and when it came time for speeches, he stood up, glass in hand, a twinkle in his eye that I knew meant he was going to embarrass me. Sheila, ever since you were a little girl, you've always surprised me. Smart, beautiful, and stubborn as a mule. And now, you've gone and married this young man who seems to love you more than his manuscripts. Everyone chuckled as Ben blushed, looking at me like I was his anchor. To Sheila and Ben, may your lives be filled with more love than there are books in my office, and that's saying something, Dad concluded, raising his glass. Life with Ben started like a fairy tale, but fairy tales don't tell you about the bills and the late nights worrying about how to make ends meet. Ben's books weren't exactly flying off the shelves, and as much as I believed in his talent, the world didn't seem ready to bite. I upped my hours at school, took on extra classes, and even ran after-school clubs. Anything to keep us afloat. Hey, I picked up an extra shift at the tutoring center, I mentioned one evening, stirring a pot of spaghetti, trying to keep the concern out of my voice. Ben was at the table, papers spread out like a wild sea of ink and frustration. He looked up, his eyes tired but grateful. Babe, you're killing yourself with all this work. Maybe I should get a regular job, put writing on hold for a bit. I walked over, took his hand, feeling the rough edges of his fingers worn by endless writing. No, you're going to crack it, I know it. We just need to keep at it a bit longer, okay? Your stories are good, they just need the right eyes. He squeezed my hand, a silent thank you hanging between us. That night we ate dinner late, talking about his latest manuscript that just couldn't find a home. One day, Dad dropped by, something that wasn't unusual, but the look on his face was. He had that "I've got an idea" expression that usually meant things were about to get interesting. Ben, have you ever thought about writing for kids? I mean, Sheila here has all the inside scoop, spending her days with them. Might be something to think about, Dad suggested, casually flipping through one of Ben's rejected manuscripts. Ben looked over at me, eyebrows raised. Kids, huh? What do you think? Could I do it? I nodded, excitement bubbling up. Absolutely, you could. I can tell you what they like, what stories stick. We could try it together? So, we did. Nights became our brainstorming sessions. I'd come home with tales from school, what the kids laughed at, what games they played, and Ben would weave them into stories. It felt right, working together, creating worlds for children who were so much like my students. The days rolled into months, and our first children's book took shape, a story about a mischievous raccoon with a heart of gold. Dad was instrumental, giving us tips on how to market it, how to pitch it to his contacts. When we finally got a publishing deal, it felt like we'd won the lottery. "Here's to Rocky Raccoon, may he be the first of many," Ben toasted, holding up his beer one night in our little kitchen that suddenly seemed too small for our growing dreams. "To Rocky," I echoed, my heart full, thinking maybe, just maybe, we'd turned a corner. Rocky Raccoon was just the beginning. After the first book hit the shelves and kids went nuts for it, Ben and I knew we had something special. We buckled down, turning out stories faster than you'd believe. Our little office at home became a workshop of dreams, paper everywhere, ideas scrawled on walls, and endless cups of coffee. One evening, as we were knee-deep in our third book, Ben tossed his pen down and stretched. "Can you believe this, Sheila? From barely paying the bills to signing autographs at book fairs. It's nuts." I laughed, tossing a crumpled paper ball at him. "We're not quite J.K. Rowling yet, but yeah, it's wild. Kids are actually dressing up as our characters for Halloween." Ben picked up the paper ball, shot a grin at me, and threw it back. "And to think, all this started with your idea to write for kids. You were right on the money." As our fame grew, so did the opportunities. Invitations to schools, interviews, even a TV spot. I was teaching less and writing more, which was a dream come true in its own way. Dad was over the moon, always bragging to anyone who'd listen. "Ben and Sheila, the dynamic duo. You guys are smashing it," Dad said one day, dropping by with a new contract from a big-name publisher. "They want a series, can you believe it? A whole series based on your characters." Ben, who was usually the cool one, nearly jumped out of his chair. "A series? That's big league, baby. Sheila, we've hit the jackpot." As our book series took off, our lives changed in ways we'd never imagined. We bought a new house with more space for our work, and every room felt like a piece of our success. Celebrations were frequent, with friends and family always eager to toast to our success. At one particularly lively party, with our closest friends raising glasses in our new living room, I took a moment to watch Ben, laughing and sharing stories. I felt a mix of pride and a twinge of fear. Were we ready for all this change? "Hey, you okay?" Ben noticed my quiet moment and sidled up beside me. "Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? But good. Really good." I smiled, leaning into his side. He kissed my forehead, wrapping an arm around me. "It's more than good. It's everything we dreamed of. And I couldn't have done any of this without you, Sheila." Life got even more hectic, but in a way that made every busy moment worth it. Soon enough, I was cradling our newborn son, deciding to step away from teaching to focus on our family. With Ben's writing now more than enough to support us comfortably, I threw myself into being a mom and a collaborator on each new book. Even though I wasn't in the classroom, I kept my hand in education by channeling what I knew about kids into our stories. "Look at us, huh?" I said to Ben one night as we looked over our latest manuscript, the baby asleep in the next room. "Making books and raising a little boy. I think we're kind of superheroes." Ben laughed, pulling me close. "Yeah, superheroes who deal in diapers and dialogues. But I wouldn't have it any other way." The evening of Dad's 70th birthday was supposed to be a grand celebration, and it was. Held in one of the big fancy restaurants downtown with a buffet where everyone seemed to mingle effortlessly, except me, perhaps. As the night unfolded with laughter and the clinking of glasses, I couldn't help but notice Ben. He seemed unusually occupied, not with me or our son Jamie, who was now 17 and more into his phone than the party, but with a young woman whose laughter seemed a bit too loud, even over the buzz of party chatter. They were tucked away at a corner table, heads close, talking animatedly. Something inside me tightened. I tried to focus on my dad, who was busy being the life of the party, but my eyes kept darting back to Ben. Finally, I pulled Dad aside during a quieter moment. "Dad, who's that woman with Ben?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice betrayed a tinge of concern. "Oh, her?" Dad glanced over, following my gaze. "That's Lisa, the assistant editor at the publishing house. She's been working closely with Ben on his latest project." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. They seemed to be getting along well. Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "It's all professional, honey. You know how these events are, just shop talk and networking." His tone was dismissive, but it did little to ease the nagging doubt in my heart. Pushing down the jealousy that bubbled up, I plastered a smile on my face and returned to the festivities. Relatives and important guests came over to congratulate Dad, pulling me into conversations and away from my spiraling thoughts. As the evening wore on, I found myself watching Ben and Lisa from across the room. They were laughing again, their heads tilted together in a way that looked far too intimate for a simple work discussion. Each laugh, each shared glance between them felt like a small puncture to my heart. "Let's get some fresh air," I suggested to Jamie, needing an escape from the stifling atmosphere. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm. Jamie and I leaned against the railing, overlooking the city lights. He talked about school, his friends, and his plans for college, normal things that felt grounding in that moment. "Thanks for being here with me, Jamie. I needed this," I told him as we headed back inside. "Anytime, Mom. You know I've got your back," he replied, bumping his shoulder against mine playfully. We re-entered the party, my resolve strengthened. I would enjoy the evening for Dad's sake, for Jamie's. As for Ben and whatever was happening there, I would deal with it later, when the music stopped and the guests went home. After returning from some fresh air with Jamie, I couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. As much as I tried to focus on the celebration, my eyes inevitably wandered to where Ben was still chatting animatedly with Lisa. It was like watching a play where you already knew the tragic ending, but you couldn't leave your seat. Determined not to let this spoil the entire evening, I tried to mingle. Yet, every laugh and snippet of music seemed to echo with underlying tension for me. Finally, I decided to head to the ladies' room to freshen up, perhaps clear my head. That's when it happened. As I walked down the quiet hallway towards the restrooms, the muffled sound of voices stopped me dead in my tracks. The door to one of the private dining rooms was ajar, and through the crack, I saw Ben and Lisa. They weren't just talking, they were in an embrace, kissing like two teenagers hidden away from prying eyes. My heart hammered against my chest so hard I thought it might burst. Anger, shock, and a profound sense of betrayal swirled inside me. I felt rooted to the spot, hidden by the shadow of a decorative plant. Just then, their conversation floated out, clear and sharp. "We need to figure this out, Ben. Once your book launches, we'll have enough to start fresh. Just you and me," Lisa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ben's reply was a low murmur, but his words were like daggers. I know. I just need a bit more time to sort things out with Sheila. It's complicated with Jamie and everything." The cold reality of their plans hit me hard. I was supposed to be his partner, his wife, yet here he was, planning a future with someone else as if our years together meant nothing. Feeling like I might get sick, I pushed off the wall and stumbled into the restroom. Inside, I leaned against the cool tile, my reflection in the mirror a stark reminder of the fool I had been. Tears threatened, but I willed them back. Crying wasn't going to help, I needed to think. After a few deep breaths, I splashed water on my face, trying to erase any sign of my tears. Composing myself, I stepped back into the hall, only to bump straight into Dad. "Sheila, what's wrong? You look pale," Dad said, his voice full of concern as he noticed my disheveled appearance. "It's nothing, Dad. Just feeling a bit under the weather," I lied, attempting to brush past him. Dad, however, wasn't having any of it. He took my arm gently and steered me away from the main hall into a quieter corridor. "This isn't just a headache," is it? Talk to me, honey. The floodgates opened, and I poured out everything to him, from Ben's frequent late nights to what I had just witnessed. Dad listened, his face hardening with every word. "This needs careful handling, Sheila. We'll sort it out, don't you worry," he assured me, his tone firm yet soothing. "Let's meet at the detective's office tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." Nodding, feeling a mix of relief and dread, I agreed. The rest of the evening was a blur. I couldn't bear to stay any longer at the party, claiming illness, and left with Jamie, who was confused but too sleepy to question much. Ben didn't come home that night, claiming later that he was caught up at work. I knew better now, but kept my newfound knowledge to myself, preparing for what was to come. The next steps needed to be planned with care, and I was grateful to have Dad by my side, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The next morning felt like one of those days when you wake up wishing the world would give you a redo. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with thoughts of betrayal, I drove to the detective's office where Dad had agreed to meet me. He was already there when I arrived, his face a mask of concern and determination. The detective, a middle-aged man named Ron, ushered us into his office. His room was lined with shelves filled with files and 2 chairs opposite his cluttered desk. It looked like a place where secrets came to light, and I braced myself for what was next. "So, Mr. Morris told me a bit on the phone. You want to look into your husband's activities, correct?" Ron's tone was professional, but there was a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "Yes. I need to know if what I saw is just the tip of the iceberg," I said, my voice faltering a bit towards the end. Ron nodded, pulling out a notepad. "I'll need some details from you. Times, places, any particular people involved besides the woman you mentioned." As I recounted everything, from Ben's late nights to the incident at the party, Ron took notes, his expression unreadable. After I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen against his notepad. "We'll start with surveillance, check his known hangouts, and track his movements. If he's meeting this woman, we'll find out when and where. Do you want photos or just a report?" "Photos," Dad cut in before I could answer. "We need everything documented, just in case." "Understood," Ron replied. He then looked at me. "It might take a few weeks to gather everything. These things, they take time and patience." 3 agonizing weeks later, we were back in Ron's office, sitting across from him as he laid out what he had found. The folder he opened seemed to spill out my worst fears. Photos, detailed reports, bank statements, and more painted a picture I couldn't deny. "Mrs. Morris, I'm sorry, but it's as you suspected," Ron began. "Your husband has been seeing the assistant editor for over 2 years. Since shortly after she was hired by your father." My heart sank as he continued. "He's transferred large sums to her accounts. Bought her an apartment and a car. They spend most of their free time together. And from what I've gathered, they've discussed marriage, planning it for after your son turns 18, to avoid any complications with alimony." Dad's face was stone. He reached over and squeezed my hand, his grip tight with shared outrage. This is unbelievable. After everything I've done for him, this is how he repays our family?" Dad's voice was low, each word heavy with betrayal. I sat, frozen, as the reality settled in. The man I had loved and trusted had planned his future on the ruins of our past. "What do we do now, Dad?" My voice was barely a whisper, drowned out by the roaring in my ears. "We'll figure this out, Sheila. We'll make sure he regrets this," Dad said firmly, his jaw set. Dad had invited Ben, me, and Lisa, the assistant editor, to our family home under the guise of discussing a new book. Once we were all seated in the living room, which had always been a place of warmth and laughter, Dad started the meeting in a tone that was unnervingly calm. "Thank you all for coming. Today, I thought we'd discuss a potential new plot. Something real, something revealing." Ben looked uneasy, glancing at Lisa, who was visibly nervous. I sat silently, watching as Dad opened a folder thick with photos and documents, the evidence collected by the detective. He slowly pulled out one photo after another, laying them on the coffee table for all to see. Imagine a book where the main character, a successful writer, betrays everyone who loves him. Dad began, his voice steady but cold. Ben's face drained of color as each photo and document showcased his affair, his financial betrayals. Dad didn't stop there. He recounted how Ben got his start with his help, how I had supported him through thick and thin, writing the early books that made him famous, providing ideas and editing drafts. You see, I've invested a lot in you, Ben. And this, he waved at the photos, is how you've repaid us. Lisa began to cry softly, her hands trembling. I didn't think it would go this far, she murmured. I'm so sorry. I'm pregnant. Dad's eyes then turned to her. And you, young lady, think about the decisions you make and who they hurt. The room was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the decorous surroundings. Then, Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped together. I can make a few calls right now, to some very influential friends in the publishing world. What do you think would happen to your career then, Ben? Ben was shaking, his voice barely audible. Please, I made a mistake. That's not enough, Ben, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I slid the divorce papers across the table. Sign these. They state that all assets stay with me, as do the rights to our books. Lisa gasped, clutching her stomach. Please, don't leave me with nothing. I looked at her, my heart hardening against the betrayal, but softening at her plight. I'll leave you the apartment Ben bought you. That's more than generous, all things considered. She nodded quickly, wiping her tears, and signed the papers. Ben tried to argue, his eyes darting from the documents to Dad's stern face. This isn't fair. I deserve. Dad picked up his phone, holding it menacingly. Do I need to make those calls, Ben? Defeated, Ben signed the papers, his hands trembling as he realized the full extent of his losses. Once the door closed behind them, the silence was almost deafening. Dad turned to me, his expression softening. Sheila, let's focus on a fresh start now. You and Jamie need something better, something new. Maybe think about moving closer to us, getting a new place where you can make new memories. I nodded, feeling the weight of the day settling on my shoulders. I'll think about it, Dad. Thanks, I managed to say, the prospect of moving forward both daunting and necessary. When I got home, Jamie was waiting, his face anxious as he looked up from his homework. Mom, are you okay? How did it go? Sitting down beside him, I took a deep breath. It's over, Jamie. Your dad and we're done. He made some choices, and I made some too. We're going to start over, just you and me. Jamie reached out, taking my hand, his support immediate and firm. I'm with you, Mom. It's been rough, but I know you did the right thing. Let's just move on, together. Over the next few weeks, we talked a lot about our next steps. Dad's suggestion to move closer kept playing in my mind. The idea of a fresh start grew on me, and soon, Jamie and I began looking for a new place, somewhere closer to my parents, somewhere we could build a new life. Finding the right house took time, but when we did, it felt right, a cozy place not too far from my parents, but still our own. As we settled in, I returned to teaching. Walking back into the school, seeing the children's faces light up, hearing their laughter and excitement, reminded me why I loved my job so much. These kids, with their endless curiosity and resilience, helped me find my own strength again. Life started to find a rhythm again, a new normal that was different but fulfilling. Jamie thrived, diving into his studies and eventually heading off to university. His resolve and support never wavered, anchoring me through the changes. One evening, as I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset, Dad came over, sitting beside me. You've done well, Sheila. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Dad. It hasn't been easy, but it feels right. Starting over, being here, close to you and Mom, it's given us both a chance to heal and grow. He nodded, looking out over the yard. Life throws some tough lessons our way, but how we come out of them, that's what defines us. As we sat there, the tranquility of the evening wrapping around us, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. Yes, the road had been unimaginably hard, but here we were, stronger and together. The love of my family and the joy of my work with the children filled my days. I had found my way back to happiness, back to a life where I could thrive.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1, if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.